Hey guys, it's Pope and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing the powerlifting technique series, finishing it up with a video all about the deadlift. It is really important to focus on your technique when doing the deadlift because it's one of those lifts that can really leave you susceptible to injury if you don't perform the technique properly. A lot of back injuries found in lifting in general come from the deadlift when you are rounding your back during the lift. And so all of these technique cues today are going to be focused on finding that neutral position in your back and keeping you safe while you get to lift heavy. If you find this video helpful, please be sure to press the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you're already subscribed, be sure to click the bell to turn on your notifications so you don't miss any of my future videos. I want to say a thank you to the sponsor of this video, which is Built Bar. This week I am trying out one of these limited edition flavors. This one is Coconut Brownie Chunk. I had one of these yesterday. It's really good. I love these protein bars because the macros can fit into any of my macros, whether I'm cutting or bulking like right now, trying to put on muscle, because they're high protein in a small little package. If you want to save some money on the protein bars, use my discount code. It's KPOPE10, or you can check out the link in my description of this video and you can try some of these protein bars. So good, so chocolatey. Let's dive right into the technique of the deadlift. To start out, we can talk about the two stances that are available to choose from. You have your traditional stance and the sumo stance. If you're going to go with the traditional stance, which I recommend for all beginner lifters to start out with the traditional version, you're going to set up with your feet about hip width distance. If you're choosing to use the sumo variation, your feet are going to start out much wider, and the width of that is going to really depend on your limb length and your height, so it's going to vary person to person. But what we're looking for here is that your shins can remain vertical in a nice straight line. The difference between these two stances is a lot about what muscles are going to be involved, especially on the first half of the pull from the ground to the knee. The traditional stance is going to use a lot more lower back, whereas the sumo stance, you're going to get a lot more of the hips and legs and a more upright chest straight off the floor. So it's less of that back and more on the legs. And you also have a shorter range of motion. So similar to what we talked about with the bench press, doing that arch on the setup, which limits that range of motion and makes you be able to move more weight because you don't have to move it as far. Same thing here with the sumo stance being an advantage from that standpoint. Something I'm going to reiterate several times during this video, the most important thing to remember on your technique for the deadlift is no rounding of your back, okay? No rounding your back. That's going to lead to those injuries, disc issues, all kind of things we don't want, muscle pulls of the erectors. We want to keep a neutral spine, and everything we do in the technique video today is going to be focused on keeping that back nice and straight, not round. The next thing I want to talk about with your setup, once you get your feet where they should be with traditional or sumo, I want you to focus on your toe pressure. If you've been watching the full series and you watched the squat video, I talked a lot about foot pressure being important. That comes into play on the deadlift as well. We don't want to only be using the posterior chain. We also want to use the front side of our legs as well. And if your toes are pressing down throughout the lift, you're going to be able to engage those quads off the floor and get that leg drive going. Whether you're using the traditional or sumo stance, you want to use your legs on both kinds. Next, we need to really focus on a tight core. Similar to the squat video, you also want to work on engaging and lifting the pelvic floor and tightening the transverse abdominis when you start the lift, especially if you are a postpartum woman. We don't want pressure pushing downward through the pelvic floor when you start this deadlift. So start with a nice tight core, lift the pelvic floor, then we're gonna start the lift. Same with you guys too. We want a nice tight core, abs are engaged, we're working with everything around here nice and tight, not just the back. You want the front side of your core engaged too. Next up, let's talk about the grip options. You can either do a double overhand grip or a mixed grip. If you're gonna do the two overhand grip, I would recommend going with a hook grip. Now, women doing a hook grip on the 45-pound bar that are used to doing cleans for weightlifting, this is gonna be a little bit difficult to get your whole hand around the bar to do the hook grip. So you may want to try out the mixed grip. And I definitely recommend switching up your mixed grip hand. So don't always use the same hand underhand, because it's going to develop your muscles a little bit differently when you have one underhand. So make sure every now and then you're switching out that hand if you do choose to do the mixed grip. The mixed grip does feel a lot more secure versus the double overhand, but there's pros and cons to both, because like I said, you're gonna be a little bit twisted when you have that mixed grip going on. There is also the option to use straps on a deadlift, but if you are planning to do a competition, you cannot use straps in competition. So don't use those too often if you plan on ever doing a powerlifting meet, because you're not going to develop your grip strength if you use straps all the time. Next thing to think about is where your shoulders are in relation to the bar when you set up. We want to see the top of the shoulder line up directly over the barbell. If your shoulders are too far forward or too far back, you're going to end up either pulling around your knees with a funky bar path, or having the bar swing out in front of you if you are starting out with the shoulders too far over. You want to focus on this barbell moving straight up vertical with the least amount of like forward and backward off of that straight line bar path as possible. We are looking for efficiency here on the deadlift. Now that you have your setup perfectly dialed in, let's talk about what muscles to start engaging. A cue that I really like to use for my lifters is to pack the lats, and that means to not just flex your lats, but also to like pull them down, back and down along with your shoulder blades. So if you pull your shoulder blades together, like you're pinching them together, just like on the bench press video, and then also pull them down like someone is putting their hand near your armpit and they're gonna tickle you, but you're like pulling away. That's one way you can think about pulling that lat in and getting it nice and tight. But when you are setting up, you should actually see that lat tighten up and almost like hide your armpit space. You don't want any space there. We're really getting that back to lock in before you start any pulling. So this is before you've started any momentum. We want to get that back and lats nice and tucked in and tight and ready to go. Now let's talk about the head position. I personally like to deadlift with my eye gaze looking down the entire lift, but you can also look out maybe about 10 feet in front of you. But the important thing to think about is to tuck your chin. So you're going to be protecting your upper back now by not overextending your back. This is where it really differs from a clean or a snatch. If you've watched me do weightlifting movements before, we do these kinds of pulls with a nice tight arch in the back, and you don't want to do that on these heavier deadlifts. You want to protect the neck, so you want a neutral spine. You want a little gobble gobble when you're doing the deadlift. Like pull your turkey neck out. The next thing we're going to talk about is what happens right before you start breaking that barbell off of the floor. What we want to do here is get the slack out of the bar. And this is going to apply to when you are working up to your heavier lifts. It's not really going to work on your lighter percentages. And some of you may not even be to weights to where this is going to apply just yet, but it's still a concept that you can start thinking about. So what we want to do is focus on a really slow pull off of the floor. And if the weights on the bar are heavy enough, you're actually going to just bend the barbell a little bit with the plate still on the floor, nice and slow, and then you're gonna get the bar to elevate off of the floor. If you look at some really strong lifters, you will see the bar literally bend before they start actually getting those weights to lift off of the ground, and that is getting the slack out of the barbell. So we're just eliminating the whole like rip off of the floor, which is gonna create some like downward pressure. So you're pulling the barbell a little bit and then actually beginning the full deadlift. The takeaway from all of that is I don't want you to just rip the barbell off of the floor quickly. We're doing a slow separation so that we can keep everything in our body tight and tense and have a smooth lift off of the floor. If you can get that momentum going those first few inches, you're more likely to finish the lift than if you are really aggressive off of the floor, and then you might have some like rebound of the plates, and that's going to mess up your lift timing. One of the keys to think about throughout the entire deadlift, now that we're going to start moving that barbell, is I want you to keep the bar as close to your body as possible. So you're going to go as close to grazing your shins as possible without actually dragging it against your shins. This is why a lot of deadlifters will wear socks so they don't end up with bloody shins from keeping the bar so close. The first half of the deadlift, we're gonna really focus on the leg drive and pushing through the floor. So the first half is more similar to a squat, and the second half is going to be that hip hinge action, a lot of posterior chain. So when you're working from the floor to the knee, I want you pushing down with those toes. Don't forget, we're not lifting the toes off the ground, and we're pushing through the floor all the way to the knee. I want nice tight back throughout this entire part of the lift too. This first half of the lift is where your back is going to be most susceptible to that rounding. So keep your lats nice and tight all the way to the knee, and then you're going to start pulling those hips through. Once the barbell passes the knee, like the millisecond it passes your knee, you're starting to focus on bringing those hips forward to meet the bar. You're going to squeeze your glutes and stand up nice and straight to get that fully locked out hipped open position at the top. When you finish the deadlift, I don't want you to overextend to try to get those hips open. You just have to stand straight up and down. You don't have to overdo it with a big arched back at the top, because that's another area that can lead you to an injury. So we're just getting nice and tight at the top with a straight body. If you're competing, you are just showing the judges that your hips are nice and open and waiting on that down signal. If you are interested in doing a powerlifting competition, remember that you also have to put the barbell back down. It doesn't count if you drop it from the top, which you see a lot in CrossFit and a lot of my weightlifting videos. You'll see us weightlifters, we drop the barbell from the top because that's the end of our lift. On a deadlift, you have to put the barbell back down. It doesn't have to be slow, but you do need to stay tight on that descent back to the floor. One common mistake I want to make sure to touch on: when you are breaking the barbell off of the floor, make sure that your hips are not rising first. We want our head to be the first thing traveling up, not the booty popping up. So make sure that everything is rising in unison, not doing the stripper butt off of the floor. Another mistake I see commonly is overly tucking the chin at the top of the deadlift. We don't want to end up with the neck in a round position on the finishing position, because that's going to pull the shoulders forward and create a round back just holding the barbell at the top of the lift. I know I talked about you can keep your eyes down if you want, but that doesn't mean let your head tilt down while you're doing the lift. You can keep your gaze down, but your head neutral. So I don't want to see you doing this at the top of the lift. This is a big difference. My eyes are in the same spot, but my head is neutral, versus letting it round my shoulders forward and head pull forward. So we want to just see a neutral spine, neutral neck on your lockout. Another thing that is very common that I also want to touch on is peeing on the platform during deadlifts. I don't say that to embarrass anyone or make anyone feel uncomfortable, but it is very common. And just because something is common doesn't mean it is normal, or you should just shrug it off and be okay with it. If that is something that's happening to you, which is called stress incontinence, it's from the pelvic floor not being able to handle the downward pressure, I would highly recommend you see a pelvic PT. There is in-person PTs that can really help you with this condition, and they can help give you specific strengthening exercises so that you can perform heavy deadlifts without having that stress that it might happen that you pee on the platform. You can also check out my core program. It's called Core Construction, that's made for postpartum women. And in that program, we really focus on strengthening the deep core muscles that will help support the pelvic floor. And if you get your entire core stronger, that's going to take some of the load off of your pelvic floor, which in turn could help with that stress incontinence. If you are looking for a powerlifting program, I have a subscription month-to-month program that is group training. We have tons of fun. I'm actually doing that program right now with my own training. $12 a month, and we would love to have you on the program. I hope you guys found this video helpful and found the entire series helpful. If you have not seen the other videos, I made videos just like this on both the squat and the bench press, so definitely check those out. If it was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up and leave me comments. I would love to see some A+. If you follow me on Instagram, you will get that joke. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.